That's, of course, fairly recent, 140 years or so. All right? Then we look at a ruin from either the Greeks or the Romans or whatever. That's a little older, isn't it? About 2,000 years. Okay? Then we look at these things, which they want to claim is early man. That could be Nebraska man, for all I know, which turned out to be the tooth of a pig. But they had pictures like that about Nebraska man that were published when it was first presented to the media back in those days. Or it could have been Peking man, or any one of those ridiculous concepts of prehistoric man. And that's back to about 2 million years. And then we come up with this, the dinosaurs, crowning glory of everybody's interest, from kids and adults and all of that stuff. And they go way back to 65 or 70 million years. And then, of course, become extinct at that period, in that period of time. They existed long before that, but that's the end of their late Cretaceous period of existence. Then here's a so-called bird reptile form, if you like, which supposedly from which dinosaurs evolved from bird-like creatures, which is, if you heard, let's see, I'm trying to think of who gave the talk on, wasn't there a talk given on that, of how it was impossible for, yeah, that's right, yeah, so he presented very well to show you that it's impossible for the dinosaurs to have evolved from the birds. 150 million years, okay? And then here comes some more dinosaurs, earlier period, taking them back even earlier to something like, oh, maybe 280, 260 million years. Long history for the dinosaurs. And then we go to the sea and all of these jellyfish and, sea and jellyfish that's in there. And then we go back to the neighborhood of 500, 430 something million years. And then we're looking at the earlier forms here, way in the Cambrian period, where the explosion of everything we know that supposedly ever existed or was created came about all of a sudden. But there's that big gap from this period in the 570 to 505 million years that the evolutionists claim, all the way back to 4.4 or 3 to 3.8 billion years from the time the Earth was first formed, cooled, and then the earliest forms, supposedly blue-green algae or some forms of bacteria, existed maybe 3.7, 3.8 billion years ago. That's what we're told, right? So there's the whole pattern of what we're supposed to believe. Now that earliest period is just, everything's in turmoil. Everything's in chaotic condition at that time because life had not yet begun to evolve, right? And I say that with trepidation, but where does life come from? Chemical evolution, ancient ocean, the soup of chemicals. Well, in my previous talk, I showed you that that soup of chemicals cannot produce even the building blocks necessary for life. Can't even get to the right molecules. So how are they going to turn into life in the first place? Well, random chance. What else? Random chance is a God, right? I mean, sure, it's got all the attributes of God, doesn't it? And Dave Prentice, when he was here a few years ago, I think he alluded to random chance and took it down word for word as to how random chance mimics God, or attempts to mimic God. But anyway, the concept is random chance. Now, random chance is not a thing. We know that. Random chance just clocks time-wise events or probability of things happening within time frames. That's what random chance is all about. It's strictly probabilistic, right? You can't get around that. So there's nothing guiding that. There's no intelligence there, right? But nonetheless, that's what you have. So what do you need to get by random chance? Well, you need to get the components. Let's say we're going to talk about a RNA or a DNA strand, or a portion of that strand, forming. Well, we need to have this phosphate molecule first, which is phosphorus-oxygen combination. Then we need to have the sugar. This is called deoxyribose sugar. That's a sugar that's in RNA and DNA. Then we need to have these bases, adenine, cytosine, guanine, and thymine. And I went into that in detail in my last presentation. And it changes for your RNA because RNA changes from thymine to uracil. But all of these things have to be in place, and they have to form. And now, once they're formed, they have to get organized, don't they? Just forming them is one thing. Okay, there's our DNA double helix twisting around there, the basic building blocks, and then the proteins, the guy jumping around here, that's a protein, okay? And how did they turn into life? How do we get cells out of these things? Once you form all of these things, you know, you start with inanimate material, non-living. Then you form these gigantic molecular structures, right? Is that any more living than what you started with? No. You just got a bigger inanimate structure, a more complex array of everything that composes that structure, right? So that's a situation. You don't have life coming out of that. But here, we have the components and how they relate to the cell. The cell has that specific domain of its contents and all of the things that it has to do or it has to function for, right? And there are major components in the cell associated with the various components of the DNA and the proteins and forming all the essentials that govern what happens in the process of life. Okay? Did that just jump up all of a sudden like that? That's the question. Did all of those things just fall into place? I mean, I tried to give you some appreciation last time about the complexity of that. DNA is a coiled thread, about, well, 2 meters long. It's a little better than 6 feet. 6 feet, okay, of a DNA strand. Now remember, DNA cannot be seen except with what? High-powered microscope, right? Electron microscope. To see DNA components, you have to have a powerful microscope. But something that's that long, 6 feet long, or more than 6 feet long, is all coiled up and doing its job. That's only considering one strand of a DNA component. And there are many, many components of DNA, right? If you were to unravel them. So we got a lot of stuff twisted up in our cells. A lot of chemical stuff in there, all compacted in there, all just uniquely accommodated